You're listening to the Midlife with Courage podcast. This is where women in midlife come for inspiration, motivation, and sometimes a little direction to help them flourish after 40. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Midlife with Courage. I am Kim Benoit, and today I have Rebecca Faye Smith Galli with me. She said it's okay for me to call her Becky, so I will call her that while we're talking. But Becky, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us where you are in the world and what you're doing.
Well, I am in Lutherville, Maryland, which is right outside of Baltimore. I am a writer and columnist, and my second book, Morning Fuel, came out in October. So I've been talking a lot about that. My first book, Rethinking Possible, came out in 2017, and that's the story of my crazy life. So I have had some adventures, we'll call them. When
Sure.
I was in my 20s, I lost my 17-year-old brother to a water skiing accident. So our active family of five became a reconfigured family of four. So that had its
Wow.
challenges. And then in my 30s, I had one married the man of my dreams, had a beautiful baby girl, and then in my 30s, I had six difficult pregnancies and two special needs children. And that took a toll on our marriage, and we divorced. And then 9 days later, I was paralyzed by a rare inflammation of the spinal cord that affects 1 in a billion people. And so one third recover fully, one third recover partially, and one third have no recovery at all. So one of my courageous challenges, I will say, has been to accept a life in a wheelchair because I was in the third that did not recover.
Wow.
But it fostered a prolific writing career, and I've enjoyed that. I never thought I'd be a writer, but it just, happened to be one of those things that
Yeah.
popped up and I leaned into.
Wonderful. Wonderful that that's how, not that that all happened to you, but wonderful that you've been able to channel that and write about it. And we're going to talk about that. So you already mentioned courage and being courageous. Is there maybe one thing that you can pick out where you felt the most courageous in your past life or even today?
Well, it's interesting. As I think about some of the challenges, like learning how to drive from the wheelchair, or learning how to swim from the wheelchair, learning how to parent from the wheelchair,
Mm.
but all of those, I think, came from this, acceptance that the rest of my life was paralyzed at age 38, and it took me 2 years to really accept I would be in that third that didn't recover. So at 40, I said, I got to figure out how to learn this life, live this life fully from the wheelchair. And
Mhm.
so looking back, that's probably one of the most courageous things I finally did. There was a relief in that kind of acceptance, but then a challenge to figure out how to live life differently.
Sure. I think that would be a really huge challenge because, especially because it sounds like you were someone you'd already gone through a lot of different challenges or adventures, like you said, and you're probably more of an independent type person and had that kind of a spirit. And then life says, here, we're going to put you in a wheelchair now.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that was one of the hardest things for me to learn was to ask for help, to be comfortable asking for help when I felt like I should be able to do this myself. And you realize there's some things you physically can't do for yourself. And then with parenting, who can help me parent these kids and run them up to all their different activities. They
Mhm.
were, when I was paralyzed, they were 3, 4, 6, and 9. And so those are
Wow.
young kids with lots of activities and interest. And I really didn't want my limitations to limit them. And so it became a real mission of mine to make sure they could live their life fully too. But that
Sure.
required help.
Yeah, I bet. I'm just thinking of my kids. They're grown up now, but as teenagers, and they get a little mouthy, they get a little, and what are you going to do about it? I would think that would add just another little layer of it, not just as little kids, but as they get older too. That must have been really challenging.
it was, and I had a lot of caregivers that helped me out.
Mhm.
And I will say it gave me a lot of material to write about. There was, you would have these teenage girls babysitting your kids, and then you'd overhear them giving them maybe things you didn't really want them to know about quite yet. And it was funny. One of the entries that I write about it's called Don't Learn That. And it came from my son's birthday party when he was 4. And the little kids that he had over were singing happy birthday. And when this one kid decided he wanted to burp the alphabet, and so all of these kids started burping the alphabet, and I've just felt so inadequate to how do you get them to stop this, because it was funny, and then everybody, because I was reacting, was making. So then later on there was a sitter in that was telling my son that was older, I didn't study for that test, and I was like, it just popped out, don't learn that. And so that became something that I used in parenting these kids, is like if I heard somebody say something I didn't agree with, I would just say, now don't learn that. And so, you had to kind of poke fun at it, but at the same time,
Yeah,
the message was clear. I did not like what my child potentially was learning. So,
yeah,
but that's the kind of material that I got, with
sure.
life, with all these people in and out. So it was fun to write about it, and it resonated with people. And that's
Yeah,
part of the thing I really missed. I was a sales gal for IBM for 10 years. I was used to interacting with people and connecting with them, and I really missed that. But fortunately, in 1997, that's when the internet and email and all that kind of stuff
Mhm.
started to come to fruition. So I was able to connect into that and stay connected by telling my stories.
Sure. So was it kind of an overnight thing where you thought I should start writing about this, all this stuff that's happened, or was it kind of a gradual process? I'd love to hear how people came to these decisions and how they kind of transformed. Tell us about that process.
So I was, like I said, I was paralyzed in 1997, and my father had been a columnist. He was also a speaker, a minister, but in one of his columns, he mentioned this strange infection, this transverse myelitis that's rare, affecting me. And one of my high school buddies I hadn't heard from in years read one of his columns and emailed me and said his subject was, "Is that you?" And it was just really so many layers of that. Was it me? Was I still me after this paralysis? Who was I? And because we hadn't talked to each other in so long, I updated him on my marriage, my kids, my divorce, the paralysis, all those kinds of things. And he was very quick to respond, and he liked the stories I would tell him. So I would tell him the stories about, difficulties I was having or challenges I was having. And then he shared them with some of his people, and I shared them with my family. And this is way before social media or blogs or any of that kind of stuff. You just copy and paste an email address and copy my story to it and send it to him. And somebody said, maybe you should submit this to the Baltimore Sun. And there was a person in my church that was a former editor, and he took a peek at it and helped me with a couple of things, and it was published. And because of that op-ed piece in the Sun, I wrote a few more for them. Then came my From Where I Sit column for a local weekly paper that I did for 12 years. And
Mhm.
so one thing led to another. Somebody said, you really ought to write a book. And because you've had so many things. So
Yeah.
I tried to do that for a long time, and I really didn't have legs. I couldn't get a publisher. And so I wound up going back to school for a two-year creative nonfiction program out of Stanford to
Uh,
just get some education under, what I like doing, and that seemed to help. And so the books came after.
nice. So that's the only training you had besides your life experiences and writing?
Yes, that, and I guess just my dad's columns. I patterned them after his, your short little 300 to 500 word columns, and then I did have more seminars and education that I did online later.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, the Thoughtful Thursdays I still do, although mine today is a Thoughtful Friday because I didn't get it out yesterday, but I continue to do that, and that really keeps me, as one of the seminar instructors asked us in a writing seminar, figure out why you write, because that will be your mojo, your go-to when you're struggling. And
Uh,
my reason was pretty simple. It was like I write to remind us that myself what I believe, which is life can be good no matter what. But can is that tricky word where it's like you got to work on it, it
yeah,
just doesn't happen.
right. It can be good. Yeah, I love that phrase. It can be good no matter what. And you've had a lot of no matter what.
Yep.
It sounds
A lot of
like
what?
a lot of what. I'm sure there's other words we could use, but this is a clean podcast, so we won't.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yeah,
Works.
yeah. So a lot of my audience, we were talking before we started recording, are women over 50, over 40, and they're going through their own kind of, what do I do now? My kids are grown up. My husband's maybe he's retired. Me now, what do I do? Have you gone through that at all with with everything else going on, all your other what's?
Yes, I think it's a continual rethinking of what you can still do,
Hmm.
given your age, given your resources, that first you have to be kind of honest about what are you interested in. And if you don't know, explore and
Hmm.
see what feels right for you and what feels like you can grow in it. And I think that that's always this cycle of kind of rethinking. And it was not my title, but the title of my first book is this Rethinking Possible, where you move into a different situation, a different stage of life, and you assess it and figure out what can you still do, and also what do you enjoy doing. And I think as we get older, that's more important. It's not like you have to do something. Hopefully, you have some choices about it. And if you need to make money, that's a consideration. That's part of being honest about what you have to do. And the other thing I like to think through is instead of life being empty, I like to think of it as being open. A lot of after my empty nest when my youngest went to college, it was tough, but I think reframing it is kind of an open to what else, what can I put in now that I don't have that piece in my life anymore? My kids aren't in my house anymore. What can I still do? What do I want to do?
Yeah, I love that. Just the way you changed that from empty to open. I mean, that totally just changes it. I mean, okay, it's not empty. Now it's open to me. What more can I do? I love that.
Oh, thank you. My
Yeah,
daughter helped me with that one as I was crying. She said, "Mom, just think about all the things you can do now. That you
yeah,
don't have all these responsibilities." I said, "Yeah, it's open instead of empty." So
yeah, I
smart
love that.
lady.
Kudos to her. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the funny, what popped into my head is I've said that to other people. Like someone I know had lost their job, and I'm like, oh, but now look, you have opportunities. You can do you have all this like new things, and I'm like, I don't apply it to myself, but it's easy for me to say it to other people. But do you ever find that? Because it sounds like, I mean, you have such a great attitude. Do you ever find that you kind of sometimes forget to apply things to yourself?
Yes, I have a good friend that I talk to every once in a while, and I remember one time it was like, Mike, this is, I'm really struggling now. Life is hard. Da, 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 da. And I said, what do you advise? And he goes, you need to go read your own stuff. Like, what? But yes, it's easier to kind of give it than it is to take it. So I laugh at that, but you're right. You can't see it in yourself sometimes that you're doing the very thing that seems clear when you're talking to somebody else.
Right, right, for sure. So your first book, Rethinking Possible, I love that too. I mean, I love how that all ties in. So the morning fuel book, I want to talk about that because this is something that you've designed for people to do each morning, obviously, morning fuel. So talk about that.
Yes, so the first book, Rethinking Possible, was the story of my life. And I think the question I got most often was, how do you do it? How do you live this life after these continual losses? And one of the ways I do it is every morning I fuel up with some daily readings. And so I figure, why not, you know, write what I do, which is take little stories, and I have like 6 or 8 different books I rotate through just to kind of get my brain going. And
Mhm.
so this morning fuel is that they're, some are very short, some are a couple pages long, and they're stories that either I have told, my father has told, my grandfather has told, that either inspire, encourage, or make you think. And
Yeah.
so I put these together, and at the end, they're little reflective questions to kind of get your brain going about how you might use the theme of that particular entry and apply it to yourself.
hmm hmm I love, I've started, okay, we're recording this the first week of the new year, and I've started really, I've always done like in the morning, I have my own time, quiet time. My husband's not up yet. And I'm going to journal. I'm going to do all this. And it turned into, I'm just going to do a puzzle every morning. And it wasn't really productive. I mean, it was fun, but now this year I've started reading and journaling, actually writing words down on paper. So I think this is something that people could really relate to and kind of stick with if you're kind of asking those questions to kind of not just reading it, you're kind of thinking about it a little bit.
Right. Absolutely. And when you're doing that, anytime you are doing a puzzle, you are working that brain.
Yeah.
So, and I think, we start our day some ways. We're going to have, for me, it's lemon water and it's coffee and it's reading and it's journaling. And so,
Perfect.
but everybody starts it, you got to start somehow. And so
hmm
I'm just encouraging people to do it with the fuel that I use for my mornings. And so far
Yeah.
it's been pretty well received. It's nice to get the comments back about how it resonates with folks. So that's
Yeah.
great. I love that connection.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
really why I write, is to keep connected to people.
Yeah. And I know I've talked to a lot of authors on here. I love to read too, and they always love getting reviews on their books. And so
Yeah,
we'll put the links in the show notes and everything. But yeah, I know that's something that's very helpful for
it is.
authors.
It is absolutely. Would love those reviews.
Get those reviews, get that feedback. Awesome. What's in the future for you? Are there more books coming? What do you think is ahead? What's open for you?
What's open for me is I have done some book signings and some book presentations. I'd like to do more of those, and I think they'll be in the future. It's nice to talk about the book and see where people have questions about
Yeah.
it, and so I really enjoy that. I do have a third book that is sketched out a little bit, and it might be a morning fuel too, except for this one would be more oriented toward losing without losing it, and what I've discovered
Oh,
about that.
interesting. Losing without losing it. I need that one.
Yes. So, well, I think we all have, but I want to make sure that people understand it's an uplifting thing. It's not like just because I always consider the reader, and it's like, if you got the book that said losing without losing, if somebody gave you that book, what would it say? So it's really still more morning fuel. It's just oriented toward, getting through a tough loss and the
Yeah.
positive nature of that. Although I will say, in writing this book, The Morning Fuel, I've learned that, it's important to be positive, but also not to ignore or deny the pain of the current situation.
Yeah.
That you can come in so uplifting that it almost feels like you discount the pain. So I always say, first, be honest about that. And as a listener, I try to affirm that, yes, that is a tough situation. And you can't move to the positive until you've really accepted the reality of the pain of the current situation.
Mhm.
So loss is pretty much inevitable. One of my favorite ways I start my presentation is, is anyone here's life not gone as planned? Show of hands. And inevitably people's hands go up. So we've all had, right? We've all
Yeah.
had some kind of loss. Now, that doesn't make us losers. It means that we
Right.
have experienced something that we need to move through. And
Right.
so that's really going to be the bent of this next book, I hope. We'll see.
Yeah. I love that.
Thank you.
How do you, you've been through a lot of loss. You've lost your brother, a child. Even one of those things to me would be catastrophic, obviously, but it would be hard to just keep going and have any positive messages. How do you do that?
Well, I have my routines and I lean into those when life gets really difficult. I have to kind of look back and consider the evidence that I have been through it before. What are the things that have helped me get through that? And I think it's, again, this honesty about this hurts. If something hurts, I'm going to say, ouch. Yep. And then my resources, who can help me get through that. I call this getting people in the boat with you. Who can help you navigate this stormy sea? And that changes from time to time. Sometimes it's family with the loss of our parents, and my sister couldn't help me through that particular grief because she was in her own grief.
Sure.
And I think I've learned that about grief, is that it's something that you have to reach out, find people that aren't directly affected by it that can be more helpful, because sometimes if you it becomes a pity party, you're both in grief and you make it more difficult for each other.
Sure.
So getting that resources of people in the boat with you is kind of number two. And number three is keep moving. If you're going to have a pity pit, put a timer on it. Go cry in the bathroom for 10 minutes, and then the timer goes off, and that's it.
Yeah.
And what can you do? Your routines keep you moving. That's why I like my morning fuel routines, and something always to look forward to. Also, I'm a big planner. When will I see my kids again next? When will I have coffee with a friend next? When will I, be able to go shopping next? Those are things in the keep yourself future oriented. So those are the kind of things that help me move through it.
Yeah. I always say too, like women of this age, no matter what our situation, we're all kind of in the same boat. We're going to the
Yes.
same place. So it's nice we can sometimes get into each other's boats. And I love that imagery and help each other out.
Yep, it's your friends are so important. They really
Yeah.
are, and I think the older you get, the more common things you have. And I know I've got college buddies that are still really great friends, and we now communicate more regularly than we ever did because it's easy with social media and texts, and
Yeah.
so it's great.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Tell us where we can find you if someone wants to get your books or learn more about you. Do you have a website or tell us?
Yes, the easiest is my name, BeckyGalli.com, BeckyGalli.com. And my books are available anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your independent bookstores. So and on my website, there's links to all of that. And I also have my Thoughtful Thursday, little stories that are fresh new stories that I come up with. I try to do once a week, but sometimes, as I say, when I have something to say, I will
Yeah.
do it on a Thursday, and you can join that again on BeckyGalli.com. It pops up and you can sign up.
And so is that like an email that comes every week?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, it's
awesome.
email newsletter. Yes, and
Oh, wonderful.
your podcast will be on there,
Wonderful.
when we air this, and
Yeah.
others are there, as well as other recent writings that I've done for other publications are listed on my Thoughtful Thursday.
Oh, wonderful. I've been doing a weekly newsletter and it's hard some weeks to come up with something to say. I'm glad to hear you say that though, because you're a writer. And
Yes,
so if you have trouble with that, I'm like, okay, I'm okay.
yes. And the older I get, the more grace I give myself. I love the
Yeah.
definition of grace as unmerited kindness. And it's like, you know what? You just didn't get to it this weekend. That's okay.
Yep.
Next week here and next week is coming. There's another Thursday next week, right?
There's
So,
another one coming. I love it. Oh my gosh. Becky, it's been so great talking to you. Before we say goodbye, is there any one last little tidbit of knowledge or inspiration that you want to share with the listeners?
I think my four-word supercharger, I say from time to time, is even though whatever the circumstance that you're in that you don't particularly like or want to be in, I can still, even though I can still. And that immediately gives you kind of a pivot from the reality to the possibility.
Love it, even though I can still. I'm going to be saying that all day today. I love that.
Well, I hope it's a great day for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again so much for talking with me today, and we will talk to you soon.
All right, sounds great. Thanks for having me.
You bet.